This is Hannibal from the HannibalTV.com, and I'm 12 years late on this, but I've had numerous fans ask me to review the 2008 film The Wrestler, and Steve Austin recently re-uploaded a podcast he did with Sean Waltman where they briefly discussed it, and Austin mentioned that he didn't like the film. So I thought I would do this review because so far it's been a slow news day. I'm going to head off to the gym in a couple minutes, and when I get back sometime after midnight, I will do a daily news update. But to get into The Wrestler, I remember watching this back in 2008. That was the last time I saw it until I rewatched it last night. For the purposes of this review, somebody posted it on YouTube. I don't know how long it'll remain up there since that was not a legal post. But here in Canada anyways, or at least in my part of Canada, it wasn't in all the theaters. It played only in special theaters just for limited screenings. And I remember driving like 45 minutes across town to watch a screening of this movie. Overall, I liked it more the second time than the first time. The first time I watched it, I really didn't like it. And one of the main reasons why I didn't like it the first time was because I was thinking of it mainly from the wrestling perspective, and I didn't think that it accurately portrayed some elements of the wrestling business. Now, looking back on it 12 years later, and I'll get into specifics, it does portray some aspects accurately and others not. But I understand why it was critically acclaimed, because the story of it is pretty good. The actual story, not taking into account how accurate it was about wrestling. But one of the things it does portray accurately is the types of dressing rooms you're in as an independent wrestler. It's often like a children's playroom in a rec center, which it displayed, or a small change room that everyone's crammed in, or a small room with a couch in it. So it did portray the actual look of an independent dressing room well. One thing I noticed it didn't portray well was having doctors in the dressing room. In all my time as an independent professional wrestler, only on the larger independent shows I've been at like venues that really require paramedics, has there been paramedics there. Only one time did I ever wrestle on a show where they had real doctors able to do stitches in the back for an independent show. And that was because I wasn't in a hardcore match that night, but there was like 6 hardcore matches on that show that involved dangerous stuff such as glass. So they had it there. But I think even when I was in Deep South Wrestling, they didn't have paramedics or doctors backstage, because I remember Luke Gallows busted my eye open once in a match in WWE's development territory, Deep South Wrestling. And it was Nick Patrick, who was the referee for the match and the son of Jody Hamilton, that ended up doing my first aid. So having doctors in the back at every independent show, that's rare, unless it's in a state that requires it. Also, having wrestlers clap after the match. It seemed like every match he had in the movie, he comes back to a standing ovation. I have personally never, ever seen that on any show in 20 years in the wrestling business, other than in movies. We've seen it on Undertaker Last Ride documentary. I think we saw it on Beyond the Mat. But was that done more for the movie purposes? Because to be honest, on an independent show, most people have their match and leave, unless the promoter's screwing around and not paying them until long after the show, then they'll wait around. But on independent shows, It's rare that wrestlers will actually watch the other matches. And wrestling has a lot of jealousy. You're just not going to see the clapping on an independent show when someone comes back in after a match. As I said, I've never seen it, and I was wrestling from 2001. I still work behind the scenes at wrestling events, and I've yet to ever see that at any wrestling event I've been involved with, or when I've been backstage at WWE shows numerous times. The other thing that they portray wrongly about the behind the scenes is, for one thing, there's nobody with steroids out on a bench like they're showing the scene where a wrestler's selling Mickey Rourke steroids, and there's a whole bunch of steroids sitting on a bench. Yeah, there is drugs behind the scenes in wrestling, more so in the past than now. There is even some alcohol I've seen from time to time. Sometimes, if the promoter's cool with it, you will see open drinking backstage. I've never seen open drug use backstage or steroids obviously being passed around backstage. I have been aware that wrestlers have taken steroid shots at shows. I have seen that, but it hasn't been open in the dressing room. I've seen it off to the side in bathrooms quietly from, let's say, people I knew that were involved in it. And the only reason I knew that they were doing it was because they told me. I didn't see people openly getting steroid injections. I have been aware of people doing cocaine backstage and stuff, but again, they do that quietly, kind of secretly, where only their friends will really know what they're doing. And that's the other thing, speaking of friends, in real life, you don't see wrestlers all being friends in the dressing room. At least the closest friendly dressing room I've ever seen was the WWC Puerto Rico dressing room when I wrestled for them in, I guess, from late 2005, and I wrestled for them a little bit in 2008. The dressing room was very friendly, but most of the wrestlers weren't getting paid, and the company owed the wrestlers a lot of money in those days. There was lots of pay issues, so the dressing room, there wasn't a lot of jealousy over pay or spots on the card because it was like a situation where hardly anyone was getting paid. So it's like it was more like a volunteer team behind the scenes. I remember from WWC Puerto Rico, but any independent shows, even in Great North Wrestling, there's cliques. People are friendly with their own cliques, but you don't see everyone sitting in a group all making jokes amongst each other. Even if it's in one room, like some of the scenes in The Wrestler where the dressing room was just in one room, you'll see people in their cliques in the corner, or some people that just want to sit by themselves. They'll go in their corner. I've even seen it with Dustin Rhodes once in WWC Puerto Rico, coincidentally. I don't know what he was doing. What Jim Neidhart told me once, never ask people what they're doing in the dressing room. Unless you know them, don't ask. It's not your business. Dustin, we were in a small dressing room, and it had a shower stall. I remember Dustin walked into the dressing room, took a chair, put it in the shower stall, took his gear, put it in the shower stall, closed the curtain. So some people just want to be left alone, but like you don't see everyone goofing around usually. But some dressing rooms, as I said, are friendlier than others, but you don't see the big camaraderie because even on the independent scene, you have egos. People are getting pushed. People want the push. Various people don't like each other for various reasons. Jeremy Prophet's told on this channel an altercation he had with Kevin Owens that almost resulted in blows in the dressing room. Wes Briscoe, just 2018, I believe, 2018 or 2019. He had an altercation in the Great North Wrestling dressing room. I had to calm down. I posted a video on here last week of an altercation that Lady Yasmin and Tony Atlas had in one of our dressing rooms that I had to calm down. So there is altercations and egos behind the scenes. And then from the perspective that this was recorded in 2008, kind of set in 2008, and Randy the Ram, Mickey Rourke's character, was supposed to be a famous 80s wrestler. Then we see him in 2008 doing hardcore matches, taking staples, blading in matches, and just doing it for whatever they're willing to pay him. Please feel free, anyone on here, name me one wrestler from the 80s that in the year 2008 was going out there and taking staples, doing hardcore matches. Let's face the facts here. If you're from the 80s, by the time 2008 rolls around, you're just going in there and doing your little routine. You're not actually taking any bumps. I asked this to the Honky Tonk Man once, and I think it's on tape. If you look at the After Dark interview with Honky Tonk Man and I, when we've both been drinking and we're driving home from a show, we weren't driving, someone was recording us. I think I asked him about that. What would you do? That was in 2008, by the way. If a wrestler came up to you and said, what if I use a staple gun in a match? Honky Tonk Man would have said, fuck off. So from that perspective, an 80s wrestler in the year 2008 wouldn't be going out there in a match, bleeding, using staple guns, doing all this shit for pennies, as it seemed like he wasn't getting paid very much. The closest wrestler to that would have been Terry Funk, who was doing hardcore wrestling long after his prime. But Terry Funk was paid a lot. I know that for a fact. Terry Funk required a lot of money in later years to perform. For instance, when he performed in Great North Wrestling, Terry Funk required the same pay that Kevin Nash required and required the same pay that Bret Hart was asking for. So the fact is, if a guy like Terry Funk from the 80s in 2008 was going to do crazy shit, he would have demanded good money. But on average, guys like Honky Tonk Man, Brutus Beefcake, Bushwhacker Luke, all these older guys like Kamala, by the time 2008 rolls around, they're just pretty much there for the fans, just to do their little performance that they're known for. As far as how it portrayed like the drug use of a lot of wrestlers from the 80s and how they fucked up their lives, how they didn't save their money, how they were beat up, that was fairly accurate. The way that Mickey Rourke walks in the movie is actually the way a lot of the old wrestlers walk. So he did a good job of portraying that. So many wrestlers from the 80s weren't even alive by 2008, let alone now in 2020. So many of them are dead just from all the years of the travel is brutal on you, the steroid use, painkiller use, everything adds up. And then there's, just to show you how bad wrestling can be for you, we see Mickey Rourke buying steroids in this. We see him tanning. We know that tanning causes skin cancer. Unfortunately, I know that all too well. I just had to get some skin cancer removed. And if you watch me throughout my career, I was never that tan, so I wasn't even really that frequent a tanner. Then you see him bleaching his hair. Also bad for your hair. Then all the partying that comes in with wrestling. Wrestling is bad for you. It has cleaned itself up a little bit, but there's still a lot of that going on as far as the drugs and stuff in wrestling, particularly on the independent level in a lot of cases. The story itself, it's a sad story. When they told the story of him basically screwing some rat and doing cocaine and getting drunk and then missing a dinner date he had with his estranged daughter the next day, that was sad. That actually made me sad to see that. But I know how badly alcohol can screw people up. So some parts of the movie like that were excellent. But as far as, the most unrealistic part was the friendliness, how 80s wrestlers would have acted in 2008. But as far as the story itself of this beat up wrestler going around still doing it, one scene that I know too well is when he's working in the deli and the guy recognizes him as a wrestler while he's doing his shoot job. The guy recognizes him as Randy the Ram. And you know what? I was never a huge television wrestler, but in this area, I'm pretty known as a wrestler. And I have headlined big independent events in this area. So I've experienced that myself when people have seen me at my regular job and kind of been shocked that I'm doing a regular job. And you kind of feel the disappointment when they see you that you're working a regular job and you're not this as big as a star as they thought you were. And I could identify with that, even though I was never a massive multimillionaire TV star. I can identify with people recognizing me and being shocked to see me doing my regular jobs. And it's not a good feeling. It's a depressing feeling. So it does explain the movie a lot, how wrestling can be depressing. It is a depressing business. You want that roar of the crowd. And when you don't have that anymore, oftentimes people turn to drugs and alcohol, and oftentimes the famous ones don't save their money, and then they can't go back to the real world, because when your actual job is performing in front of thousands of people and basically having fun, when you have to go to the real world and be bossed around by a shitty boss doing a job you don't like, it sucks. It really sucks. So it does portray that aspect of it accurately. Overall, it's not a bad movie. As a wrestler, as I said, I was more offended in 2008 than I am now in 2020. They did use payphones a lot in the 2008 movie, and it made me realize just how rare it is to see a payphone nowadays. 2008 doesn't seem like that long ago to me, but seeing how much he used a payphone, I don't even think they exist around here anymore. So again, that's my report on the movie. I'll go into some questions. Probably the closest guy that reminds me of the wrestler, and he's even admitted this to me, is probably Greg Valentine. As far as like when Greg Valentine does autograph sessions, sometimes he just sits there and he looks so depressed. And Honky Tonk Man's even said it. Greg Valentine's kind of a manic depressant. And from my understanding, he didn't save his money great. So he might be the closest to the wrestler character of anyone I've encountered. However, the wrestler character that Mickey Rourke plays is much nicer of a person than Greg Valentine is in real life. Valentine's more of a shyster. I'll get in a few of your questions. Nacho Man 64 said best movie ever. Woody Eyebrow says I've seen that film in the cinema. After I watched it, I wanted my money back. That's how bad I thought it was. Zombie MMA said your story of your life would make an awesome movie. That's my honest opinion. Well, my story is not over yet. I do agree, and there's a lot of stuff about me that people don't know. A lot of really crazy stuff. One day I'll put it in a book, but there's certain chapters of my life I want to close first before I actually look into writing a book or doing something like that along those lines, because I'm only 37 and I've had really an insane life. I'm blessed. I'm blessed to be alive. I really am blessed to be alive. There's so many times I could have died in my life, and some of it's my own fault. Gerald Parker, when was my last match? It was in May 2018. I wrestled former Ring of Honor champion and three-time WWE Tag Team champion Pierre Carl Ouellet. It's on YouTube, Hannibal versus PCO. And one thing this movie did make me realize is I'm glad I have this now. I'm so thankful. Once again, I thank you guys. I'll bow down to you guys. I'm so thankful I have YouTube. So I have a life after wrestling, and I'm not clinching to that wrestling. Because even before I stopped wrestling, I made a rule for myself. Seeing everyone crammed into those rec center dressing rooms, it's so depressing. There's nothing more depressing than that. Great North Wrestling, at least we're at hockey arenas. There's usually 4 to 6 dressing rooms with showers, but there's nothing worse and more depressing than being crammed into a small dressing room than having to go out wrestle in front of anywhere from 20 to 100 fans. Woody Eyebrow said Chael Sonnen had a friend in The Wrestler. I had a lot of friends in The Wrestler, and it was cool. Now I didn't know anyone that was actually in The Wrestler when it was being made. Now I do. It's funny, they use Ring of Honor a lot in The Wrestler. Like, the final scene of the movie is a Ring of Honor match with Mickey Rourke. And it's funny that Ring of Honor is actually less popular now than it was in 2008. I did take that from the movie. Rocky Ruling says if Greg Valentine would show up, he would have been The Wrestler. Good point. He is known for his no-shows. Fruit Pie the Magician says wrestling is all about the ring rats. Angelina Ramon says Tyson Fury. Is that me? Boom, 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 boom. I wish. I'm a fan of his. But I might not be a better boxer than Fury, but I am a better wrestler. The Tiger Man says, best movie, Hybrid I-78, said he'd buy my book. David Hugh, have I ever tried to interview Ole Anderson? If I'm ever back in Atlanta, I will. John Vulcan says, geez, it's already been 12 years since that movie came out. Yes, that's crazy how fast time flies. Mr. Unknown says Johnny Valiant was in The Wrestler. So we'll end it at that. Again, I'm 12 years late, but I didn't have a YouTube channel in 2008. That's my review of The Wrestler. And I'll be back later tonight with my daily news updates. And yeah, wrestling is an interesting form of entertainment for sure. Turkey Trail Honeybee from Farm, Georgia says, mostly true about some wrestlers, but some are worse off. Dick Slater was worse off. Kamala is worse off than the guy in the movie. He lost his legs, lives in a trailer, but he has a good family, at least. Kamala has a good family. I'm not going to say who's worse off that are still alive out of respect to them, but wrestling is a sad business in some ways, although I don't believe this generation of wrestlers that's in the WWE and AEW and all that right now, I don't believe it'll be as bad for them because, for one thing, wrestling's not as popular now. They're not like mega rock stars now like they were before. And overall, while there is still partying going on, it's not as widespread. And for one thing, there's not as much cocaine going on. I know there's still a lot of cocaine use in Mexico, but in North America, like, I don't think like the cocaine style drugs are as prevalent amongst wrestlers at all. Because I can't even remember the last time I've heard of a wrestler from the modern era doing coke in the dressing room or anything like that. So have a good night, everyone. How tall am I? 6'5" with my wrestling boots on.